Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 42 of Teaching Tales, the podcast totally devoted to sharing stories from the world of education, whether you are a teacher, administrator, support staff. This is the podcast where we have a different guest on every week, sharing stories that will hopefully encourage, inspire, and make you better as an educator. I am Brent Coley, your host, a former 4th and 5th grade teacher, currently the principal of Alta Murrieta Elementary School in beautiful Southern California. And my guest today, really excited, Shawn Wisley. How you doing, Shawn?
What's up, Brent? I'm all right.
Yeah, fantastic. We have been trying to connect for a while.
And
I know that you have listened. So first of all, thank you. So now I know it's Mom, Dad, and Shawn.
I do have to say, every time you sign off and thank your mom and dad, I'm like, and me.
Okay, and Shawn. I got to remember that. And Shawn. So, and I know that I have said, Shawn, open invite as a guest, come on in. And you've been thinking, okay, I'm going to think of what I want to share, what kind of stories. And the other day, you tweeted and said, I think I got it finally figured out. I'm reading your tweet here. The ebb and flow of loving and hating. But you know what? Stop. We didn't introduce who Shawn is. Shawn, who are you? Who is Shawn Wisley?
Well, hey, I'm Shawn Wisley. I am a middle school vice principal in Selma, California, which is just a little south of Fresno, California. And I'm a former high school Spanish teacher from down in San Diego, and couldn't swing the finances in San Diego, so moved up to Fresno and got a job out here and loving it. So a lot of good stuff in the Central Valley.
Awesome. Where in San Diego did you teach?
So I was at West Hills High School, so home of Dave Burgess of Teach Like a Pirate, and a lot of other great colleagues. Man, that place was a hotbed for a while. It was good.
Oh, that's awesome. I am from San Diego as well, so.
Yes.
All right. Well, okay, now we can get back to it.
You got it.
You tweeted, so we know now who Shawn is. You tweeted, I think I got it figured out of what to share on Teaching Tales. You said, the ebb and flow of loving and hating my own teaching career now that I'm an administrator. And as another administrator, I was completely intrigued by that.
All right.
Loving and hating my own teaching career now that I'm an administrator. So, Shawn, what does that mean? Tell me some stories.
Well, I hope that Corey Orlando is listening. I know that you had her as a guest and are friends, but I think it was Corey's post a couple of days prior to my own. She had a paper sack, I think maybe the vomit bag from the airline. Do you remember this tweet?
I do remember that, yep.
She had a paper sack, and on it she was writing all of the former teaching practices that she used to engage in that she's now mortified to have done, right? And maybe mortified is the wrong word, but you get the idea. And she started a hashtag, and she's all excited that it's catching some traction, and I am too, because I love it. And that is know better, do better, right? And so she got me thinking about it, and boy, just being an administrator and seeing teachers on my own campus and being engaged on Twitter and being out and learning and growing. And, oh, man, there's so much out there on Twitter, especially, that I see now that a lot of days I wish I was still a teacher. It's like, oh, man, I would be doing things so differently now. If only I had known when I was teaching that, that this is the way to do it. Oh man, I wish I had a chance to put this into practice in the classroom. And so there are ways that I can still engage people and work with my staff and online and in the world at large, trying to promote these ideas as well. But I don't get to do it in my own classroom anymore, And so it brings to mind things that I did so bad, but also things that I did really well, and that I wish I was still doing it with TLAP. Teach Like a Pirate just caught like fire. I feel like if I was still teaching, I'd be killing that. I'd be one of the teachers utilizing that and getting all my colleagues on board and trying to do all that stuff, right? And now as an administrator, I can still nudge and help and provide access to and buy the TLAP book for people and stuff like that. But it's just a different energy about being the teacher that's doing that sort of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'll tell you one of the things that I have changed my mind on, right? What is projects. We just had a California Ed chat last night about this project-based learning, right? And my projects back in the day, oh my gosh, they were so horrible, you know? And I thought I was making cutesy projects and the students could be having fun and I was, you know, on topic and all this stuff. But you know what? I was a high school Spanish teacher, right? And so I'd make a project where they had to do a restaurant scene, you know? And so they had to think of the vocabulary and the grammar that we had been learning and how to apply that in a restaurant scene. And they'd have to write a little mini play basically at the restaurant. And this is totally standard, right? There are thousands and thousands of high school language teachers doing this right now still, right? And it's just so bad because basically, at least the way I ran it, you know, I was making rubrics so that they would be easy to grade, right? That these projects would be simple. And by the time they were done presenting, I could have a score for them ready to go. You know, I didn't care how actually good the project was. I just knew that I needed to have a score ready to go because I was so busy, you know, and they all ended up the same. It was the same project, the same presentation. You know, I had 180 students, right? So if it was a group project, I ended up with 60 really similar projects. And it just disappointed me every time. And now that I've had more time to reflect on it, like, of course, I was setting them up that way, right? I was giving it to them, cookie cutter, ready to go. Here's what you need to do. Make sure you include these components. You know, I wasn't doing project-based learning at all. I wasn't even asking them to think about, you know, what problems they might want to solve or what scenarios they might imagine themselves in where they need to figure out how to communicate, you know, like there's so much richness and power in what they might want to learn. And I never cared, you know, and that's too bad. I stuck to that book, you know. We had to do chapters 1 through 8 as a first year Spanish team. And by golly, we were going to plan that out to the day. And I thought we were rocking it. We were great PLC. We had common calendar. We had common assessments. We had common projects, common rubrics. And so I thought we were killing it. And in fact, we were killing like the joy of learning, I think. You know, that's taking it too far. That's hyperbole, but oh my gosh. Stuff like that, you know, I think, oh, if I could redo that, or, you know, if I was entering the classroom tomorrow, boy, it would be different. And so my hope is that I can be a part of, you know, teachers on my campus and teachers in the Central Valley and teachers that I engage with online in just thinking about and their own practice and how they can improve it and stuff, not from a place of shame. So it does, you feel a little bit of the shame there, but you know, but a place of how do we get these kids engaged and empowered and excited about learning? Well, my projects probably weren't the way, you know.
No, as you're talking about that, I was visualizing some of the projects when I taught 5th grade. I think it was like my 5th year in teaching. And some of the projects that we did for open house were, there was one purpose for those projects, and that was to look good on the walls of open house. I mean, anyone listening out there, nodding your heads right now, have you done? I mean, and I look back at some of those projects that we did, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is like educational malpractice of what I was having our students do.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know any better. And
well, you know what perpetuates that is all the parents coming in and oohing and awing and thinking that it looks so great. You know, you get that validated, even though you know that it's just kind of worthless stuff just to look good. You're right.
And then I would think too, like sometimes you would have those projects that, because I taught 4th and 5th grade. So most of the projects that came home required a lot of parent help. Mm-hmm. So then you now display those on their desks at school.
Right.
And the parents are coming in saying, yeah, I've seen this. They're more interested in seeing everybody else's kids' work because they've already seen their own.
How good the engineer dad's project was.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, I remember when I was getting my admin credential, I took an instructional leadership class.
Mm-hmm.
Candace Singh.
Okay. She spoke at Lead 3.0 last year, right?
Exactly. She was the professor. She was the instructor for that class. So Candy, if you're listening, you're going to get a shout out here for a second because it's an instructional leadership class. At that point, I think I'd been teaching 11, 12 years, somewhere in that range. Kind of like you had said, considered myself a fairly decent teacher. And I remember sitting in that class, the first night of class, sitting in there, taking it with a couple colleagues from my school. We were doing the program together. And after about an hour and a half, we had a break. So I had only been in that class for an hour and a half. And then we had like a 20-minute break. And I remember going outside and telling my friends, my colleagues I was taking the class with, I vividly remember looking at them and saying, I stink as a teacher.
Right.
In an hour and a half, Candace had already brought so many things out that could be done, that could be tweaked.
Yeah.
It reminds me now of rigor, relevance, and engagement with International Center for Leadership and Education, Weston Kieschnick's and Eric Schenninger's organization that they work for. So if you just tweak little things, you can bring that depth of knowledge activity to the next level. You can make it so much more rigorous. But in an hour and a half, those were my words. I stink. Like I should lose my job right now because I could be so much better.
Yeah.
But I think that's the purpose of what you're saying is it's all about reflection. I mean, because you had talked about homework. You were reflecting on, did you want to share like a homework story or something like that? Because I'm going to join right in with you on this.
Sure. So I was so progressive in my own head, because I did homework right. So I thought, so I was, again, a high school Spanish teacher, right? And beginning Spanish 1. I always took one for the team. Nobody else wanted to teach the freshmen, but I loved it. I think I had their sense of humor. So anyway, I taught these freshmen high school Spanish. And so I'd give them 15 to 20 minutes of homework every night. I didn't want to overdo it, 15 to 20 minutes of homework every night. And then on Fridays, my gift to them, because of my bleeding heart, was that there would be no homework on the weekends because that was time for family, right? And so I thought I was so good, But here's what I did then. So that homework then was all consuming, right? Because it was a 15 to 20 minute homework assignment. Everybody had the same cookie cutter, probably worksheet junk thing, right? Practicing the grammar or practicing the vocabulary that we had just learned. And everybody's doing the same very basic work, but I had to check it every day, because I thought, well, if you assign it, you must collect it. And if you have to collect it, then it has to be worth points and you have to validate all that work, right? And so then we'd spend 10 to 15 minutes every class period going over the homework, going over the answers, and I had a seating chart with 10 squares on it to log the points each day for the kids that did their work. And if they didn't have their work, I had certain marks. And if they were late or tardy or chewing gum or didn't have a pencil or whatever, I marked it all on this chart. And it took me 20 minutes to get around the room every day, and check everybody's homework. And I think, man, how much time did I lose of opportunity for actual learning instead of just going over the worksheets, over the answers to the homework? That there are a lot of quicker ways to do that. And even, half the stuff I did wasn't relevant in the first place, so not just quicker ways to go over it, but do I really need to assign that kind of junk anyway? I just think, man, it would be so different if I could do it over, Know better, do better, right? There's that hashtag again.
Yeah.
But, there are other things. But I said in that tweet, right? Oh, sorry. What do you got to say about homework?
No.
About that.
Continue.
Well, the tweet, right? Because I talked about the ebb and flow, right? The ebb and flow of hating my career as a teacher sometimes, but also just loving it to death. Man, I have such fond memories. I love teaching to death. I love the relationship I was able to have with kids. And yes, I still, as a site leader, I still build relationship with kids. Absolutely. And it's great, but it's not as deep as it was when I had them for an hour every day as a high school teacher. I had more time with them, and I loved that part of my job, and building those relationships and knowing what was really going on with kids, and being empathetic because I knew backstories, because I asked about backstories. At the beginning of the year, I always asked students to tell me about their lives, so tell me about themselves, and I did it in non-threatening ways, but in ways that students who wanted to go deep could. I did this paper bag activity forever where, it was things on the outside of the bag represented what everybody knew about you. And then things that were inside the bag were things that you didn't talk about much, but were willing to, in that moment, reveal to the class, And, man, I had some awesome stuff shared that way. And, I did good stuff about self-assessment. Every chapter, even though I was textbook bound, which is horrible, right? Each chapter had learning objectives. And so I would set up a self-assessment chart. And if I was doing it now, I'd call that standards-based grading, right? And here are the standards that you need to meet, and how are you doing at approaching those standards, right? And I had a 5-star system, and they would self-assess before I gave a test, and then after I gave the test, they'd reassess based on what they said they thought they knew versus what they showed that they knew. And who was it? Mark Reardon is the guy's name, and he's not on Twitter. And I want to shout out to Mark Reardon all the time. He was an instructor in something called quantum teaching or quantum learning. You remember that from back in the day at all?
I have a friend who did a lot of research with that.
Okay, so quantum learning or quantum teaching, loved it to death, right? Well, this Mark Reardon guy, the one tenet that just stuck in my head that he taught me was data means most to those who collect it. Data means most to those who collect it. And data not being, this big data point that you learn from the state, but just information about learning, right? Like, who does it mean most to? The person who's collecting it. So if I, as the classroom teacher, am the only one ever grading and ever assessing a student's work, right, it matters to me, but it doesn't matter to the kid. They just want to know that final score, that grade, that's it, But if I have the kid self-assessing and trying to figure out, do I meet these criteria? Can I do this? If I've met all these standards, what are ways that I can do in self-enrichment, right? All these things that, I have to say, like, I did them, and I'm really proud about those things too, so I hated parts of what I did, but I'm really intrigued by the fact that, with all this stuff on our plates, right, all these teachers that I love to death, right, I have such empathy for them. We ask so much of teachers, don't we? Like, as a society, as districts, as school sites, right, we're asking crazy amounts from our teachers, and the fact that they are still breathing at the end of a week, is a minor miracle, and so I have such empathy for all these teachers who might self-reflect and discover that they aren't doing everything the way they would want it to be, like, I get it. It's hard. It is really, really hard, but as Adam Welcome and Todd Nisloni would say, right? Kids deserve it. And we got to put everything that we can into it, but we got to give ourselves some self-love too, like when we didn't know better, we didn't do any better, but now we can, and I try to help teachers to self-reflect, like you said, not because I want to make them better, no, because I want better stuff for the kids. And
well, I think it's all reflection.
Yeah.
And as you're saying this, it's never too late. That's kind of like going back to me in that instructional leadership class. I mean, an hour and a half, it's like, oh my gosh. But the very next day, I went and implemented one of the things that she had talked about, and it dramatically had a positive impact in my classroom. And going back to the homework thing, I mean, you're not alone, man, in terms of giving assignments that weren't purposeful, that were fillers. And why did I do that? Why did you do that? Because that's probably what we were taught to do. It's what we did as students, so it's what we did with our students. I remember sometimes spelling homework, I'm going to use as the example. And when sometimes students were, gosh, I cringe even thinking about this, but sometimes when kids would be absent and the parent would come to me and say, well, what did they miss? What do they need to make up? And I remember one time specifically saying, well, here's the math and you need to do that. And here's this and you need to do that. And the spelling, don't worry about the spelling. And then you need to go think about that now.
Yeah.
What was I communicating?
You just admitted it.
To the parent that don't worry about the spelling because, well, if it's not important now, how important was it then? I mean, like, what if the kiddo was there? Did he have to do it then? And I just think, like, right now, as a site administrator, I've been leading our staff in reflection on the whole homework practice, reading Alfie Kohn's work and studying the research, especially at the elementary level, that says there is no positive benefit of homework at the elementary grades. And the questions that I'm asking my staff, my teachers, to ask themselves, 2 questions. Number 1, why are you giving what you're giving? Meaning, like, what's the purpose of that assignment? If it's a spelling word search, why are you doing that?
Are you getting good justifications from them on that, by the way?
No. I'm using my own example, unfortunately.
Okay.
Why are you giving what you're giving? And number 2, what are you doing with it once you get it back?
Yeah.
What kind of feedback are you giving the kids? Because practice makes perfect? No, practice makes permanent. And if the kids are doing something and they're not getting feedback and they're doing it wrong, they're going to get really good at doing it wrong. So those are the 2 questions that I ask my teachers, and I'm very transparent with them, saying, ladies and gentlemen in the room, I do not stand before you as somebody saying, well, I did everything right, because I didn't.
No.
And why? Because I never had somebody stand up and ask me to ask myself those questions. Brent, why are you giving that assignment?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that question is because it's what I've always done, not good enough. That's not a good enough answer. I mean, one of my favorite analogies, and this, it's just all coming what you're talking about in this session. It's the headlight example. That it's one of my favorite analogies. If when you are in your car and one of your headlights is out, if you are in your car driving at night, you do not know your headlight is out. Because the second one typically overpower it helps illuminate the path, not as much as it would if both of them were functioning. But if you're in your car and your headlight is out, you don't know it's out. Somebody from outside the car has to tell you, hey, Brent, did you know your left headlight is out?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it's like what you're telling us here, the stories that you're sharing, it's like we need to step out of the car.
Yeah.
And even if we step out of the car 15 years into our career and somebody says, hey, Brent, did you realize that what you're doing there isn't purposeful? Or ask yourself the question, is it purposeful? Yeah. It's never too late. I mean, wouldn't you? It's like right now, how many years did you teach, Shawn?
17 years.
17 years.
Yep.
And you've been an administrator for
3.5.
3.5 years. So over 20 years.
Woo!
Having these and you're having these reflective conversations.
Yeah.
And we can choose to look at it like, oh, geez, 20 years. I was doing that for 20 years. Or, hey, I got it now. I can't change the past, but moving forward, how much influence can I have on those teachers that you serve, that you support?
Yeah.
What kind of impact can I have on them and the students that they serve and that they support?
So let's do a little Twitter plug here.
Okay.
Because as I'm having this conversation with you, the epiphany is hitting me that I'm 3.5 years in on my admin career. And if I were to reflect on that admin career so far, what are the things that I would do differently already? And so here's what Twitter is for me and has been. Well, really, it's connected me to people, right? But those people, then my PLN, as we call it in the Twitter world, right? My PLN, those are my people checking out my headlights.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm able to see when Corey Orlando posts a blog post, I read that and oh yeah, and reflect on my own practice. When Adam Welcome writes a blog, when Todd Neslony writes a blog, when the stable of Dave Burgess authors writes any one of their books, right? It just causes me to think, what am I doing about my practice? Have you read Lead Like a Pirate yet?
I'm halfway through it. Yes.
Oh my gosh. That book took me forever to read because I had to put it down every time and reflect on my own practice and think about what I would do differently if I were really working hard. All right. So,
but that's I just think the fact you reading a book like that is basically saying, I want to make sure my headlights not out. Or
right, I gotta want to check that stuff. You're right.
You gotta want to check it. And again, sometimes it may not be out, it may be askew, it may be slightly off, and it isn't a complete overhaul that's necessary. It might just be a small tweak that could make the light back on track to illuminate that path.
Sure.
So
it's good. So I need to reflect on my own practice even now. It's not about my tweet the other day was about my career as a teacher and my love and hate for that. But like even now, know better, do better. Well, I want to know better the quickest I can. I don't want my staff right now to be suffering because I didn't choose to be reflective about my practice, and that's again hyperbole. I know I'm not causing my staff to suffer right now, but to even have to, what mindless stuff am I making my staff do because it's the way it's always been done, or it's because that's how it's been handed down to me. Like right now I can reflect about that and change that as close to the event as possible, and change my practice proactively instead of, somebody telling me next year that my light was out all this year.
Yeah.
Anyway, so why you got to make me think so much, Brent?
You're the one making man. You started it.
You started this podcast, man.
Oh, all right. My bad. No, but you know what? For anybody listening, teacher, if you're a teacher, if you're a first-year teacher, if you're a second-year teacher, if you're a 25th-year teacher, or if you're a 20-year principal, the motto at our school is pursuing excellence.
Love it.
I mean, not pursuing perfection, pursuing excellence, which you will never attain perfection. It's like your reach should always exceed your grasp. And I just think that if we have the mindset, that growth mindset, which is so often talked about in education, if we're wanting to get better, it has to start with that. Whether that will take the form of reading Lead Like a Pirate, or Teach Like a Pirate, or Innovator's Mindset, or any of those other incredibly books filled with incredible knowledge and encouragement. maybe that's the first step. Maybe it's taking a class. Maybe it's Twitter plug, getting on Twitter and connecting with people. I mean, you and I are on the other halfway up the state. We're a long way away, but we're learning from each other right now at in time. So good stuff, Shawn. Good stuff.
It's better than I thought it was going to be. I had imposter syndrome going.
No. Don't sell yourself short, my friend.
This was good for me. I'll tell you that.
Don't sell yourself short. Now, people are definitely gonna get something out of this. And speaking of learning from each other, where can somebody, if they want to connect with you, you've mentioned Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? How can they get in touch with you?
So I'm at Mr. Wisley, but my ancestors couldn't spell. So Wisley looks like Wisley. So Mr. Wisley, you do show notes for the show? I don't even check show notes.
No, so I'll do an audio show note. So that's Wisley. So at
Mr. Wisley.
MRWISLE.
I appreciate that. Thanks. And that'll get you wherever, to all my resources. I got other stuff linked there. Not that I have a ton, but I do have a little blog going too, but you can find it all through Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Shawn, totally appreciate the time. Looking forward to learning more from you via the Twitterverse, and hopefully in person at another conference coming up. You're not going to Q though, correct?
I unfortunately am not going to Q, but for anybody going to Lead 3.0, I will be there. It's one of my favorite little conferences, and so check that out if you're there. And if you're listening to this on your way to Q, listen. Okay, don't just do the technology stuff. Do the heart stuff. There's so much good stuff at Q.
Oh, amen to that.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to skip a session. And that goes not just for Q, for anything. The conversations in the hallways, the relationships built, the networking, not in terms of job advancement networking, but professional growth, sharing ideas. The informal conversations are just as good, if not better, than the sessions. So,
hey, I just want to say one more thing. I would love to say a special hello to your mom and dad.
Oh, thank you. Look at that, mom and dad. You got somebody joining you, mom, dad, and Shawn Wisley.
All right.
And I'm sure there's other people listening too. Pam Hernandez, Corey Orlando. Well, I'm not going to list because that's they're probably not listening to this one anyway. So, but if you are, thank you, Pam. Thank you, Corey, and everyone else listening. Thank you so much. And if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, why not? You got to click that subscribe button. Then you don't have to check it. Automatically delivered to your phone or your computer or your tablet.
Typically on a Monday, right?
Typically on a Monday. That's right. Typically on a Monday.
Dropping into my podcast app.
That's right. So, and if you like what you hear also, I'd appreciate if you would leave a review in iTunes. Some feedback is always appreciated. So once again, Shawn, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. For everyone listening, thank you so much. And until next time, have a good one.